Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. And welcome back to another episode where I correct some of my most embarrassing movie blind spots. So back at the beginning of 2025, I posted a video that talked about 12 of the movies that I feel, as of right now, are my biggest and most embarrassing blind spots. For whatever reason, I just haven't gotten around to these, but my goal is to get to them this year. Well, now we are in the month of April, and fortunately, I am right on track. Well, okay, I watched these in March, and I meant to film this video last month, so at that point, I was right on track. We are entering the end of April now, so I do need to watch another one to get technically on track. But either way, I've been trying to watch one a month, and so right now, I have watched 3, so I figured I would share my thoughts on the first 3 of those 12. Now, if you haven't seen that original video, definitely go back and check that out so you can see the whole list of 12. But today, we are going to be talking about 3 of them that I watched. First, we have Blue Velvet from David Lynch, and then we have the Nolan film Interstellar, and then finally, we have Star Trek, the original motion picture. So these are the 3 I'm going to be talking about, but in the reverse order that I just showed them. So let's not waste any more time, guys. Oh, you know what? Before we do that, I will mention I will avoid spoilers for these reviews, so don't have to worry about any of that. But with that said, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right into correcting 3 more of my most embarrassing movie blind spots. Alright, so let's get started with Star Trek, the motion picture. And you guys can see I do have the 4K collection right here. That is how I watched this for the first time. And I went with the director's cut for my first time through. So this is from 1979, directed by Robert Wise. Now, I'll mention right off the front here, I have not watched all of the original series. Now, I talked about that in my original video where I talked about these, but I never see myself getting through that entire series, right? It's only 3 seasons, but each episode is, closer to an hour, and I don't think it's going to happen. So I said, forget it. I'm not going to even bother with that. I'm just going to start watching the movies, because I'm sure there are millions of people out there who have watched the whole entire franchise without having seen a single episode of the original series, and I'm sure they were able to follow along just fine. Well, I have seen a few episodes of the original series. I actually started it, I don't even know, a few years ago, 4 years ago, whatever it was, and watched maybe the first 5 or 6 episodes, and I enjoyed it. It's a slower moving series, and that's when I decided, you know what, I'm not going to watch this entire thing, most likely. But that said, before I watched the first movie here, I did do a quick Google search to try to figure out what are the most essential episodes to watch leading into the first movie. Well, not only did I ask there, I mentioned that in my blind spots video, and someone was nice enough to comment that there was an episode called Space Seed, I believe it is, that I should watch before watching the movies. Now, that said, I did watch Space Seed. Excellent episode. I loved that. But I think that's more important to watch before the second movie, which is The Wrath of Khan, which I'm very excited to watch, but I wanted to do this review before watching it, so I didn't mix things up in my head. But not only did I watch that one, there's another episode in season 1 that I basically kind of randomly watched, but it was the most highly rated episode on IMDb from season 1. So I wanted to give it a shot, and I see why that was the highest rated episode of the season. It was phenomenal. It was so bleak and just, I don't know, everything about it worked so well. It essentially has our main characters, we have Spock and Kirk going to Earth, but back in it's right in the Great Depression, so like in the 1930s. And he meets a woman, and there's a romantic story involved here, and it is just incredible on every level. So highly recommend that episode if you haven't seen it. But after that, I then jumped right into the movie, which is what we're here to talk about today. So the motion picture picks up, I want to say it's like a decade after the end of the original series, and we're just following our group of people into another mission, essentially. This movie, I thought, was well done. I think that what hurts it the most is the pacing of this, which honestly could be my own fault for watching the director's cut. But just as an example, right in the beginning of the movie, when the audience is essentially being reintroduced to the Enterprise, it felt like a 15-minute scene of just establishing shots of the Enterprise. It felt like it lasted absolutely forever. I couldn't believe that they stayed on those shots that long, but Outside of that, I think things are paced a little bit better, but that was just one great example of where things really could have been cut a little bit to save some time when it was just not very needed, I don't think. That said, I feel like this felt like a longer episode of the original, just in terms of the tone of the movie. But when you first start it, it feels significantly different than the episodes I was watching, at least in season 1 of the original series. The whole filming style is different. It looks a lot different. Now, mind you, I was going from Blu-ray of the series to the 4K of this, so that probably played a factor as well. But you can tell the budget is just significantly enhanced for the movie, which obviously, you know, it should be. That just makes sense. And then our characters are so much older now than they were in the original series, but that's expected because it's supposed to be that way. It is years later. But still, these are the same characters and it's the same type of setting. And so if you enjoyed the original series, you probably enjoyed the movie as well. And I did. I thought this was a well done film. The biggest weakness of this, outside of maybe the pacing, is just the villain character in this, the bad guy, is not that strong in my opinion. We have, I forget how they say it in the movie, but it's like Viger, I think it is, Viger, something like that. And you discover what that stands for, what that is later on in the film. And when that discovery popped up, I immediately ran to Google to see if there was a connection to a later series in Star Trek, but there doesn't seem to be, which was a little bit disappointing, but I thought that was a really cool little Easter egg maybe, but I don't think that it was in reality. But either way, I thought that was interesting to see. And but because this main antagonist is essentially a voiceless and faceless character, it's just hard to make that feel very menacing or very dangerous, I guess. But that said, I think the cinematography on this was absolutely beautiful. It looked incredible on 4K, and it's just a fun romp through another Star Trek episode, but much longer in length. I love the cast on this. I thought they did such a great job. Our returning characters, it was so cool to see them as these older characters, older and wiser. Kirk, I love the character of Captain Kirk. The growth he takes, even from episode to episode on the handful that I have seen, is awesome. But especially in the movie, from the beginning of the movie to kind of, as the movie progresses, just his growth, I think, is great. But just an enjoyable movie. There's nothing here that I can say like, yes, this is a new favorite. But that said, I've really fallen for the Star Trek franchise at this point. Like, I'm really enjoying it. So I think this is just something I will enjoy more as I continue through these movies. So excited to continue through this. I think this was such a fun movie, but not a new favorite, just a good film. So I'm going to give Star Trek the motion picture 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the other thing, I always forget about this when I start doing these, but I didn't talk about my shame meter. So I like talking about how just kind of ashamed I am about the fact that I haven't seen these movies. So I will put my shame meter for Star Trek the Motion Picture heading into it. I would put this one at about a 4 out of 10. And I think the reason for that is just because I own this movie in so many different formats and I've only now watched it. That's kind of embarrassing, but either way, happy now that I've seen it and excited to continue through the rest of this series. Sticking with the sci-fi theme here, I finally have watched Interstellar from 2014, directed by Christopher Nolan. This is a great example of a film that I knew virtually nothing about heading into it, and I did so intentionally. But I know that this is one of the more hyped up movies, period, let alone of Christopher Nolan's filmography. So even though I knew very little about it, other than the fact that Nolan directed it, because Nolan directed it, I had such high expectations for this movie going in. And honestly, I don't think I liked it nearly as much as I was expecting to like it. That said, still a really good movie. But anyway, Interstellar, essentially what this is about is Earth is failing our characters in this movie. We start off, we are introduced to a family led by Matthew McConaughey, and they are dealing with a bunch of dust storms and things along those lines. And they discover along the way that essentially Earth is not going to be around long for future generations. So in order to combat that, a group of researchers have discovered this wormhole that they believe can help them travel elsewhere if they can find a habitable planet to move to, basically to take from, leave Earth and go there and continue the species. Well, things aren't going to go quite as expected throughout the movie as you would probably guess. And it just becomes such a, the scope of this movie is so vast. And I had no idea that that was going to be the case. But that said, I think it is really well done. The visuals on this are absolutely stunning. But this is a confusing film. At least it was for me. Maybe I'm just small-minded. That very well could be the case. I'm slow. You know, I always say that. But I do think there was a lot here that I will appreciate a lot more on a repeat viewing. But that said, it is a rather lengthy movie, so I just don't know when I'm coming back to this one. But I'm sure I will at some point, because the 4K disc on here, arguably one of the most visually impressive discs in my collection. Now that said, on the audio side, I think the LFE was fantastic. It was rumbling my house, and I always love when it does that. But honestly, some of the sound effects were a bit louder than the dialogue, and so there were moments where I was missing some of that. Not missing, I shouldn't say that, but it was just harder to hear some of that dialogue. Now, admittedly, that could just be my setup. I don't know, but I wanted to mention it in case anybody else has kind of had that similar experience. But yeah, this one, I think what's really cool about this is just the personal story that's at play here. But because it is so large and so vast in scope, you do maybe lose out on some of that those interpersonal relationships as the movie plays on. But I think Nolan does kind of as good of a job as you could expect with given the size of this movie. But Matthew McConaughey in here is just excellent in this lead role. I think the sacrifices that he make throughout the film, I would have liked for there to be kind of more contemplation on his part. He very easily decides to just up and leave his family. It's essentially like he dies, given how, you know, time works or in this wormhole that they have to travel through and things like that. So it happens so quickly that I thought that was a little unbelievable. Now, mind you, everybody's different and every human would react differently in a situation like this. But I wish there was a little bit more played up there between his family, because he has two young kids, no wife, she's passed away, just the grandfather that lives with him. Yeah, I wanted a little bit more there with those interpersonal relationships, because for me, that's the strongest aspect of this movie, maybe outside of the visuals. It just looks amazing. But that said, I think there is a lot to like here. It is a movie that I absolutely need to watch probably a couple more times to just fully grasp everything that's going on. But I really liked how they played with time. Essentially it feels like a time travel movie with how things are done. But at the end of the day, I think it's a super well-acted film. The cast in this is great with Anne Hathaway. Jessica Chastain is in here, but Matthew McConaughey, for me, is really the one in this. I think he does such a great job. Well, Anne Hathaway does as well. She's kind of right alongside him throughout it. But yeah, it is a really well-done film. And I understand that this is a better movie than the star rating I'm going to give it, but this is just my personal experience with it, and frankly, it's ultimately meaningless. If you love this, as if this is a 5-star film for you, that's fantastic. I'm not saying it's not. It's just, for me, I didn't love this one quite as much as I was hoping. So before I give my star rating, I will give my shame meter on this one. So I was really embarrassed not to have watched this one heading into it. So I'm going to give my shame meter on Interstellar an 8 out of 10. This is a movie with how much I love Christopher Nolan. I absolutely should have seen this one, and my love for sci-fi. There's no reason it took me this long to get to this one. But at the end of the day, I am going to give Interstellar from 2014 3.5 out of 5 stars. Great movie, but one that I ultimately think I need to rewatch to truly appreciate. So let's wrap things up today with something completely different. Blue Velvet from 1986, directed by David Lynch. So you guys might remember last year, if you've been following the channel for that long, there was another David Lynch film on my most embarrassing blind spots list, and that was Eraserhead. Unfortunately, Eraserhead was just not for me. I did not really enjoy that one. Now, it's one, maybe I'll like it more if I watch it again in the future, which it's still in my collection because it's a Criterion release, but I don't see myself running back to it anytime soon. That said, Blue Velvet is such a different beast entirely, yet feels very similar in a lot of ways. It is very evident that David Lynch has a uniqueness about him that he carries through on his films. Now I've seen, I believe, 3 from him now: Dune, Eraserhead, and Blue Velvet. And Blue Velvet is without a doubt on the top of that list, but admittedly, the other two aren't that great, so that's not a super high bar to be on the top of. But that said, with Blue Velvet, we are following the story of this young man whose father has some medical issue in the beginning of the movie, and so that brings him home from college, where he decides to stay because he needs to help out the family. And while he's there, he essentially stumbles onto this murder mystery that he decides to insert himself into. He finds a severed ear in the field that he's walking through, and rather than just calling the cops, he takes it directly to this detective that lives I think it's down the street from him or somewhere around him, and delivers it to him and tells the story about how he found it. Well, a number of days later, he goes to that detective's house to ask about any status updates, which obviously the detective's not going to give him much. But when he leaves, he runs into the detective's daughter, played by Laura Dern. Absolutely amazing in this film. I've always enjoyed Laura Dern just because of her work in things like Jurassic Park, but man, I love her in this. Probably my favorite, well, I can't say my favorite role because Jurassic Park's one of my favorite movies ever, but either way, just an amazing job in this film. But Laura Dern's character leads him eventually to this apartment building, and that's when we are introduced to one of our main characters of Dorothy Valens. And with that, this whole plot unfolds, and eventually we get introduced to Dennis Hopper's character. Dennis Hopper plays Frankie, and it is so unhinged and just absolutely insane that nobody but Dennis Hopper could play that role as well as he did. He does such an incredible job with, I absolutely hated him, which means he did such an incredible job with that character. Absolutely fascinating to watch that character unfold throughout this film. But this whole story and the way that our main character gets wrapped up into this is just interesting to watch. Now, there are, like I said earlier, some David Lynchisms throughout this, and I think one of those is just the fact that Lynch seems to want the audience to know that they're watching a movie. And so things are played up. Now, specifically with this one, how he does some of that is with some of the camera shots that he chooses to do. They are very wide angle lens, and so it's kind of distorted on the edges of the frame, which I think looks really cool, but again, it's very obvious you're watching a movie. The other way he does this is with the music in this film. So there is what sounds like some old detective show style music, at least what I think of when I think of like an old detective show. And I really loved that aspect about it. Yes, it's maybe not very fitting for what they're going for, but ultimately Lynch makes it work, and it just feels really interesting to watch. That said, the lead song in this, or the main title song in this, which is Blue Velvet, what an absolute banger. I have that on my Apple Music downloaded, and I listen to it a lot. I love it. It is just such an awesome song. Actually, there is a remake by Lana Del Rey, I think, is who does like a remix of it. It's so good. I love it. It's just such a great song. But anyway, highly recommend that song alone if you haven't even seen the movie or have no interest in seeing the movie, but the song is great. So yeah, and the reason that song is played is because one of our main characters, Dorothy Valens, is a lounge singer at a local bar. And so that's where that comes into play. She sings it, but this movie just goes in such weird directions that I never would have guessed. Another one that, frankly, I had no idea what it was about going into it, and I like that about it. Like, the least I know about a movie heading in, the happier I am, and that really worked with this one. So I really enjoyed this, and out of the three, this is probably the one that has stuck with me the most, and the star rating I gave it when I watched it, well, now almost a month ago now, but that it just feels a little low because of how much this movie has, how much I've thought about this movie since then, and how much I feel like I enjoy it thinking back on it. And so I probably have to raise that a little bit once I give my final star rating here, but this is just such an interesting one. I am absolutely upgrading this one to 4K. Just an incredible film an incredibly unique film that I am so surprised I enjoyed as much as I did. So my shame meter heading into this one, probably not very high. I'd put this one at about 3 out of 10 maybe, just because it's one that a lot of people talk about, but Given my history with Lynch, I didn't know if I would really enjoy this or not, so I'll set it there. But my star rating for this, now when I first watched it, and I gave my immediate gut reaction star rating, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. But honestly, thinking back now, and now that there's been some time that has passed, I enjoyed this movie even more than that. So I am going to give Blue Velvet from 1986 4 out of 5 stars. And if you're not typically a David Lynch fan, but you haven't seen this one, I recommend it. I can't guarantee you're going to like it because it is very unique to Lynch. It feels like a David Lynch movie from the few that I've seen of his, but I think there's just something very interesting about the characters here that is absolutely worth watching. And again, Laura Dern is great, along with Kyle MacLachlan. I could be butchering that and I apologize, but I think they just do such an awesome job together. And then of course that Dennis Hopper performance just needs to be seen to believe. It is so out there and vulgar and just fascinating to watch. This is such a good movie. I will absolutely be revisiting this one. So Blue Velvet's getting 4 out of 5 stars. All right, so those are 3 of my most embarrassing movie blind spots for 2025 that I can now check off the list, and I'm very happy to have done that. So that means I have 9 more left to watch in 2025, so there will be theoretically 3 more videos of this series as we continue throughout the year, but I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments below. Have you watched any of these 3 movies? And if so, what did you think about them? Did I underrate anything in here? I'm sure I probably did. Did I overrate something? I would love to hear about that as well, but just give me your thoughts on these films if you've seen them without any spoilers, because others might read the comments and I would hate for them to be spoiled by any of the comments. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end here. I really do appreciate that. Before I let you all go, I'm just going to encourage you all to consume some media today. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you all next time.